Stardust, Chapter 28, Part 3. 3:02 p.m., May 13th, 2015. Office of Dr. Frank McKendrick. Bradford didn't consider himself a rude person unless out of necessity, but there were some times where politeness and courtesy took a backseat to the needs of the moment. It was with those needs in mind that he pushed his way past the secretary and into Frank's office without so much as a knock. Frank was currently hunched over his desk with a pot of coffee beside him while rubbing his temples. He gave one of his trademark smiles to the commander, even though it turned into a wince as Bradford turned to close the door behind him rather forcefully. "David, it's always a pleasure when you come to visit. I understand the mission went well?" His smile faltered somewhat as Bradford stalked over to the chair in front of his desk and sank heavily into it. You don't seem well. Is everything alright?" A long moment of silence passed before Bradford finally sat up and rubbed his temples. "Frank, I'm gonna be blunt here. Something is going on, and I don't have a rational way of explaining it. I don't think I can explain it, so it might be best to just show you." Several more moments of silence passed between the two before Frank opened his mouth again to speak, but Bradford cut him off. "Doctor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Valen is here to see the commander. She says it's urgent." Frank's expression became perplexed until the phone on his desk buzzed and the secretary's voice came from it.
"Doctor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Valen is here to see the commander. She says it's urgent."
The door opened and Moira stepped in before closing the door behind her. She gave a passing nod to Frank before turning back to Bradford.
Commander, I've made
a startling discovery regarding Corporal Jenkins." Bradford spoke over Moira, which caused the latter to stop and stare blankly. "While making the initial brain scans before the proposed operation to install her new prosthetic, I discovered unusual synaptic activity." The scientist opened and closed her mouth several times before giving a confused glance at Frank, who simply returned it. She slowly reached for the tablet under her arm and was just about to speak when Bradford again preempted her. "Such synaptic activity has been encountered twice before. The first was from live sectoid specimens recovered in the field, and the second was from Twilight Sparkle. Given the abnormal phenomenon that is generated by both of the previous examples, we may be seeing the first human being capable of reproducing their abilities." Bradford motioned to the tablet and Moira brought a series of pictures up depicting several brain scans. "When these brain scans confirmed the activity was present in Corporal Jenkins' brain, I decided to run a test with the TED device that was created to detect the unique energy created by Twilight. The TED was able to confirm that Miss Jenkins was now channeling energy in a way very, very similar to Twilight, as well as projecting a ghost limb of energy where her left arm should have been." Moira wordlessly scrolled the pictures to the TED readings while giving the commander an incredulous look. "When this was discovered, I recommend the installation of the prosthetic limb be done first. My theory was proven correct. Jenkins is able to control the prosthetic device without the power or control implants." Silence resigned as both the scientist and the doctor looked to each other, then Bradford. Frank started to speak, but the commander maintained his uncanny predictions. "I don't know. I can't stop it either. There's never been anything as vivid. I've always had hunches and feelings about what may have happened in a given situation, but they were nothing more than that. This foresight didn't start until just before the operation." He gave a look over at Moira before she could answer her question. "Frank, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I think I'm losing my mind." Before either the scientist could answer, the door to the office flew open and Matt Harris stumbled in. He started to speak the doctor's name, but upon seeing both Valen and Bradford in the room, he couldn't get past the first letter. "I don't know this is happening, but I know someone who might," Bradford said as he rose from his seat. 5:34 p.m., May 13th, 2015, Stardust Lab. Twilight breathed a sigh of relief as the door closed behind Charles and her and the familiar sights of the lab testing area greeting her. What was initially planned as a trip for exercise and some testing for a couple of hours ended up taking the entire afternoon after some form of emergency presented itself. Zhang disappeared down the elevator, but was replaced by Joel and Kim, who helped her with precision magic control. The two scientists brought them with what looked like a small cart that moved on segmented tracks rather than wheels and sported a turret mount with something they referred to as a baseball pitching machine on it. A series of boards with bullseye targets were set up and Twilight planted herself amongst them. After asking Twilight repeatedly if she was ready, the scientist activated the pitching machine and balls began to fly at the target. The unicorn could have easily plucked the balls out of the air with a telekinesis, but that wasn't the point of the exercise. A small circular shield appeared before each baseball and stopped them dead. Twilight and the scientist repeated the exercises over the course of the afternoon before she started to get creative with ways to block the baseballs. They finally stopped with a well-intentioned test involving portals, resulting in Kim and Joel diving for cover as a hail of baseballs were flung back at them. Twilight had apologized profusely to both the scientists while she helped clean up the mess that she had made before Charles returned. The engineer had then escorted Twilight back to the lab, where they had both pointedly avoided the subject that was on both of their minds.
Oh, thank you for taking me to the practice area today, Charles. I really needed that exercise, especially if I'm going to help more.
Twilight said with a contented sigh, though her happy mood wilted when she saw the look on the engineer's face. Twilight...
No! I cannot sit around anymore, especially if my friends are out there risking their lives!
Twilight's glare was filled with something bordering on legitimate anger that surprised even her as she continued to rant.
What? If they're risking their lives, then I can make sure that they come back! And I don't know if I could. Broken insect-like limbs, twitched in the pile of ichor, and shattered chitin. Hurt anything, but I can't keep any of my friends from getting hurt!
Charles tried to smile and speak, but Twilight cut him off with a slammed hoof.
No! These things are using magic or something like it against all of you, and there's no pony better equipped to counter them. No living equestrian knows more about the arcane arts other than the princesses, and I am the element of magic. I am not boasting when I say I will not let this happen again if I go with them.
Twilight, Charles said quietly as he knelt to look her in the eye. Twilight, I can see you feel very strongly about this. Some of the tools you helped us build have already saved lives, and I have great expectations for what we'll be able to make together. I speak for everyone when I say your place isn't in the field, but here.
That's it? You don't want to risk losing me because I might stop inventing things? Is that all I am here? I'm a convenient source of inventions?
Twilight snapped, though her brain quickly caught up with her mouth, and she looked away regretfully.
I'm sorry, Charles. I shouldn't have said that.
Had she not looked away, she might have seen the guilty look that crossed Charles's face before he spoke. I won't deny that what we have been able to make has been incredible, but I can guarantee that that's not the only reason I'm recommending this to you. He remained silent until Twilight looked up at him. Twilight, you mentioned your brother was a guard. He no doubt went through months of training before he was ever deployed, right? When Twilight nodded, Charles continued. If guard training is anything like the training from our soldiers, then it's as much about honing instinct as well as honing the body. A physically fit soldier is going to last longer in a fight than a physically fit civilian simply because their training gives them the control not to do something rash that could get themselves or others hurt. She opened her mouth to protest, but stopped when the logic hit her.
He's right. I have more magical capacity and capability than any other unicorn, but I can still lose control.
The memory of the thing that she killed when she first arrived on Earth rose to haunt her like a ghost.
Shining armor, he doesn't have the hundreds of spells I do, but he wouldn't have panicked. He wouldn't have killed his attacker. I have no doubts that you're extremely talented, Twilight, but I think your talents would be best utilized here. Moira is extremely skilled at interpreting the information we get from the invaders, and you know I'm quite skilled at building things. Matt, Lana, and Shoji are all excellent soldiers. We all have our parts to play. The late-night conversation with Moira came to mind, and Twilight bowed her head as she saw the logic in it. I can't carry a gun or fly a plane, but I can tear their bodies to pieces to know how they think and live.
Valen had screamed.
It's what I do. It's all I can do. I guess you have a point,
she said as she backed down onto the issue. Relief was clear on Charles's face as he stood and motioned towards the habitat door. Your willingness to volunteer, it does you credit. I'm confident that we'll find some way for you to help without you going into the field. Twilight followed the human into her habitat, though she nearly bumped into Charles when he had stopped unexpectedly.
What's wrong? Why did you stop?
She asked before peeking around him. Another human was in the room looking at the pictures arranged along the wall beside her desk, and Twilight recognized him instantly.
Confidence without arrogance, command without tyranny, certainty of one's decisions.
Charles, I need to have a word with Miss Sparkle, the newcomer said as he turned from the pictures onto the wall to face Twilight, and again she felt as though she was being measured and found insufficient. Twilight looked over to the engineer and found him looking back at her with an apologetic expression. Don't worry, Twilight. I'll be close by, and I'll visit once you are done. And with that, Twilight found herself alone with a human with dragon eyes. Do you know who I am? He asked evenly, and Twilight had to muster her willpower not to sink low to the ground as she shook her head in response. I'm the commander of this organization, and I oversee all combat operations as well as provide direction for research and development. I have some very specific questions I need to ask you, and I expect concise answers. Lives may depend upon the answers that you give me. Twilight could only nod in response. Good. So, you have spoken earlier about the fields that you draw energy from to utilize your powers, and you also stated that the field was in a rigid state from disuse, correct? A nod. You also stated that because the field wasn't frozen, then it indicated the presence of others who could use the field, correct? Another nod. So, with that information, would it be a reasonable assumption that some humans are capable of similar powers as yours prior to your arrival?
What are these questions for?
Twilight dearly wanted to ask, but she couldn't find her voice, so she simply nodded. The human nodded as well before continuing. So, you have also stated that the increased field activity makes it less rigid and easier to access, correct? Another nod. So, would it be possible for human beings who previously had no abilities to suddenly generate them after the field is made more accessible? Twilight started to nod even as she considered the implications.
Your theory is sound, but...
Yes or no? The human commanded as Twilight found herself nodding rapidly even as her explanation died in her throat. You have also reported that prolonged or repeated use of powers will produce headaches, but with continuous use and practice, they are lessened, correct? Another nod. Alright, one last question. Using the techniques and technology you have worked on with Charles, can you create a device or implants that can block a person from using these powers? Twilight opened her mouth to start with what would have been a long-winded explanation, but stopped when she caught the human's stare.
I'll, talk with Charles and see what we can do.
Excellent. I'll expect a prototype by the end of the week, the human said with a nod of his own before turning and walking out of the habitat. 7 p.m., May 13th, 2015, briefing room. Bradford stood at attention at the head of the room while the strike team leaders and their subordinates filtered into the room. Matt Harris and Lana Jenkins sat behind and to the side of the commander and looked rather uncomfortable. On the commander's other side sat Frank McKendrick and Moira Valen, who appeared equally uncomfortable. 10 strike team leaders and their subordinates all filled the seats facing Bradford except for Paul Drzymski. As his second-in-command was behind the commander, the Strike 1 leader sat alone as Bradford took a moment to glare at the Strike 1 team leader while he was too distracted to notice. You'll be my troublemaker. Damn your curiosity. Okay. Thank you all for coming on such a short notice, Bradford said, and all the quiet chatter died down to complete and total silence. I will keep this meeting brief. First, I would like to thank Captain Fujikawa and Lieutenant Weiss for their team's stellar performance during today's mission. The live captures are being handled even now by the science team, and we're expecting a breakthrough soon. A brief round of congratulations came from the other team leaders, but both Fujikawa and Weiss were tight-lipped as they watched the commander. The purpose of this meeting is to inform you all of the recently discovered potential that our soldiers might begin to show. These signs may be subtle, or they might not. Things to look out for might be rumors of abilities that are far beyond what a normal human would be capable of. Faster than normal reaction speeds, strength beyond normal, or even things as obviously abnormal as telekinesis. All that should be reported to me, Frank McKendrick, or Moira Valen immediately.
What about seeing the future?
Fujikawa asked humorlessly, and neither she nor Weiss took their eyes off of Bradford. You are correct, Captain. That is another potential ability to watch out for, Bradford said, even though he knew it wouldn't change the point she was trying to make.
So, you're one of them, aren't you? Someone with potential?
Yes, I am, Bradford confirmed as the room collectively sucked in its breath. I have the capacity to predict future events with a high degree of accuracy. Bradford glared at Fujikawa before speaking again. No, the predictions aren't foolproof. The glare shifted to Strike 2's team leader. No, I am not reading your minds. The glare shifted to Drzymski. Yes, others are already showing signs of similar abilities. Sergeant? Matt answered the summons and moved forward to stand beside the commander. With one hand, he reached out and opened his closed fist palm up. The object in his hand, a simple coin, began to rise slowly into the air. His face twisted from the effort and the coin began to sag and drop. Matt's now shaking hands fumbled for the coin as it slipped from his grasp, only to be caught by Bradford, who didn't so much as look to the side during the whole display. Thank you, Sergeant. You may now take your seat, he stated before taking a slow breath. Other than the sound of the air entering and leaving his lungs, the room went silent as a tomb. So, our experts believe that these gifts might be honed through practice and study to give our soldiers a greater edge against the invaders. Anything that your teams are capable of that is beyond the normal should be reported immediately for evaluation. Another sign to watch out for is chronic and persistent headaches. So, are there any questions? Bradford ended his briefing with a question, but his tone sounded more like a statement than anything else, and his glare fell upon Drzymski before he had risen from his seat. Sir, if you are capable of predicting future events, as you say, then you'll know what I'm gonna ask, Paul said as he weathered Bradford's glare. You also probably know what will happen if you don't answer my questions. Sit down, Lieutenant. With all due respect, sit down, Lieutenant. Bradford repeated the command sharply, and Drzymski replied with a tight-lipped expression. Everything you will see and hear beyond this point is to be considered classified, and sharing this information will be considered an act of treason and will be treated as such. To answer Lieutenant Drzymski's first question, the exact favors that contribute to the development of these abilities is still unknown, but all known cases thus far have been exposed to another person who possesses these abilities. To answer your second question, the original source of these abilities is currently in our possession and is assisting XCOM in the defense of this world. To answer your third question, no, this source is not human. An alien was captured during the terror mission that Strike 1 averted in Washington, D.C. in early April. Since its capture, it has cooperated with our requests as well as providing substantial amounts of information about its world and species. It is not allied with the invaders that we are currently fighting, and has gone to great lengths to assist us once it became aware of the threats we faced. Bradford's glare finally released Drzymski before raking across the room to settle on Uther, the Strike 2 team leader. Yes, this creature is the source of the abilities that we are just beginning to manifest, and it is a master of dozens of them. All of the humans we know of that are displaying signs of these gifts have been exposed to this creature and its powers, and the extension of this theory is that when these gifted humans use their abilities, then other gifted humans may become apparent. Then, it was Weiss's turn to wither under the glare. The headaches are an early sign of the gift and aren't a symptom of neurological problems. The source states that the mental capacity for these gifts is like a muscle in that repeated exercise improving flexibility and control. The headaches will eventually fade. Bradford's hands twitched as he had to resist the impulse to rub his temples. A murmur rippled through the room, but quickly silenced when Bradford held up a hand while turning his gaze back to Fujikawa. The alien, it's unlike anything we have ever encountered. The hand he raised held a remote while he activated it. The large wall-sized monitor flickered on behind him to reveal what was clearly security footage of the living quarters. Twilight sat at her desk and was singing along to a song about the periodic table while sketching a diagram of some sort with telekinesis. Another button press froze the video. Now, are there any other questions?